Right, so today we're going to talk about the wonderful topic of carb loading and whether it's actually worth doing it. I've had various comments on my YouTube videos over the last couple of years essentially suggesting that it's not worth it. So I wanted to go through some common beliefs and see whether they're true or not. And if you're new here, then hey, my name's James and I'm a sports nutritionist and love talking about this kind of thing. I'm also a triathlete and perhaps spoiler alert, but I carb load for my races. Now, if you're a little lost on what carb loading even is, it's simple at its core, but it's harder to execute. It's eating a large amount of carbohydrates before an event to maximize your body's carbohydrate stores, which we call glycogen, with the aim of improving performance. We're going to delve into all of that in this video, so let's start with myth number one, which is that carb load does nothing for performance. This one is definitely a significant myth to bust because we know that carb loading can significantly improve performance and time to exhaustion, and it's been shown in multiple studies over time. The crux of the matter is that your glycogen stores are limited, and the generally accepted stat is that you have enough for about 90 minutes of hard, steady exercise before you get to a critically low level. And if you get to that point, you'll bonk or hit the wall, which means your pace or your power will drop dramatically because you can't sustain it. And realistically, if that happens during a race, there's not really any coming back from it because you don't have enough time to resynthesize your glycogen stores properly. Carb loading works by maximizing your glycogen stores, which in combination with proper fueling should benefit your performance in any sort of endurance event where carbohydrate stores could be a limiting factor. The second myth to bust is that you have to follow a low carb diet first in order to carb load properly. It used to be accepted that in order to super compensate your glycogen stores, you first had to go on a low carb diet to deplete them, and then transition to a high carbohydrate diet in the days before your event. We know that from a physiological point, there's no need to go on this low carb diet, and it may hamper any training that you do leading up to your race. If you follow your normal diet and then do a specific carb load period, the end result is going to be the same, so you don't need to go low carb just for this. The other reason not to is from a mental point of view, because if you suddenly transition to a low carb diet, you're going to feel that sudden change to a low carb diet is going to feel very alien to you and you will feel awful. And that's not very good leading up into a race from a performance prep point of view, so don't do it. Now, the exact time period required for proper carb loading is contentious, but one myth to dispel is that you have to carb load for a full week before your event. You'll hear various different time frames, but what I usually suggest is 36 hours. There was a really neat study which looked at carb loading for a 24-hour period and compared it to a 72-hour period and found that there was no difference between the two, so realistically 24 hours should be sufficient. The reason why I suggest 36 hours is because it gives you a little bit of leeway and accounts for things like not following a plan properly or eating enough carbohydrates, doing some light training or anything else that might deplete your glycogen reserves. In my mind, this is a bit of a fail-safe to make sure you do it properly. Those extra 12 hours aren't going to impact you negatively, and it should just leave you feeling confident that you've nailed the carb load period. Another comment I've had on my videos is that if you're doing long distance stuff and it's at a low intensity, then you don't need to carb load. This is a big fat myth and is not the case. Unless you're doing really low intensity, like a couple of days walk and you're planning on eating normally, or you're doing something like an ultra run and you already follow a ketogenic diet, then those are pretty much the only reasons. For anyone else, and for example, anyone doing an Ironman or a marathon, carb loading is beneficial and it's worth doing. You will be using carbohydrates to fuel your exercise even at a lower intensity. And when you add in increased duration, the risk of bonking just gets bigger and bigger. Sufficient glycogen stores are essential for performance, and generally speaking, as they get lower, your ability to maintain pace will decrease as well, and it's very common to slow in the final parts of an endurance event because of this. Now, of course, there are multiple reasons for this, but carb loading properly will decrease the likelihood that it's due to low glycogen levels. So as an example, I carb loaded for a 70.3 triathlon I did this year.
Gotta look happy.
Yeah! The race took me 4 hours and 36 minutes to complete, and although a large amount of it was relatively speaking quite easy exercise, carb loading was an important nutritional strategy for me. For breakfast, I ate 2 white bagels with a banana and some jam, as well as having some fruit juice. A couple of hours later, I had a big bowl of granola. For lunch, I had 2 white wraps with a bit of salmon and a wrap with some honey and chocolate spread. Over the afternoon, I had a bag of pretzels and some Scotch pancakes. For dinner, I had white rice and a piece of fish, followed by some white bread and honey before bed. When it comes to the type of carbohydrate, it's a myth that any carb is fine. In theory, any carb will contribute to carb loading, but the overall aim is to improve your performance, and not eating the right types of carbs could actually harm it. The reason here is that you want simple, easy to absorb carbohydrates with a lower amount of fiber and protein in, because those are unhelpful nutrients during a carb load period. So for example, this is the time to opt for white rice over brown rice or white bread over wholemeal bread, because the nutritional profile is more favourable for carb loading for the white stuff. This can be an issue because fiber and protein are harder nutrients to digest and absorb, and in some cases can't be digested fully, which means they're more likely to still be in your gut on the day of your race and contribute to GI upset. It can take a couple of days for food to fully pass through your digestive system, which is why it can be worth transitioning to a lower fiber diet in the couple of days before your race. In addition to all of that, the simpler carbs are easier to digest and won't make you feel as full. If you've ever done a carb loading period properly, then you'll know it can be quite a lot of food to eat. And those simpler carbs make this easier because they have less fiber and protein. Normally on a day-to-day basis and as part of a healthy diet, we want those things, but not during carb loading. Now, following on from that, and this is perhaps my favorite one of them all, is the myth that all you have to do is eat a few more carbs. So for example, a bit of a bigger breakfast, an extra slice of bread or 2 at lunch, and a bigger bowl of pasta in the evening. Although this will help and that's great, it's not enough to get you to the 8 to 10 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight per day, which is required for an effective carb load. To eat that many carbs, you have to actually put some effort in, and you need some high carb main meals and snacks throughout the day. Generally, I split my carb loading day into 6 main meals with around 100 grams of carbohydrates in each, and I snack as well. As I said, it's a lot. My best advice is to use or create a carb loading plan so that you know in advance exactly how much carbohydrate you need to consume, and it'll also prompt you to consider how much fat, protein, and fiber you're consuming as well. If you don't want to spend the time creating your own plan, then you can download my free carb loading guide, and I've put a link in the description and the comment section of this video for you. So let me know if you realize you believe some of these carb loading myths, and I've put another couple of carb loading videos up on the screen for you now.